Let's continue with where we left off at part 1. That is where I was making the hulls out of the parts for the US Constitution. Here we will continue with the hull, the keel and the rudders. The plan shows that the bow and the stern parts are tied in with the keel at the bottom, and that is what we will put together with this first step. I used the plan as a template, you might say, to cut the first piece that goes to the stern and identical pieces for the bow. What I actually ended up doing is to file a groove or cut a groove into the bow and stern where these pieces would fit. It made it a little easier to attach the pieces, and for that I will be using some two-part epoxy. What I usually do is I just take a little dab of the hardener and resin, about equal parts, and mix those together and apply them with a toothpick, actually, to the groove in the bow. I'm sorry my hand is in the way, but I think you can see that with this toothpick I just put a light dab of that glue in there and then put the pre-cut piece onto that section there. Then after I'd done that, I also added the keel, the straight piece, and there are two pieces of wood involved actually, some pear and basswood for the straight piece, as you can see right here. After that, there was some sanding to be done, of course. I started with my disc sander and then finished up with doing it by hand. I also then applied a coat of some primer, and this looks rather crude, but it will all be sanded nice and smooth. The next step was to make the gudgeons for the stern, and for that I used a piece of copper wire, pounded it flat, and then with a pair of needle nose pliers I made the little bend in these pieces to make about 4 or 6 of those gudgeons. I then actually used some blackening material to blacken these 6 pieces. I made about 8 actually, a couple spares. And here's where this patina comes in. I'll leave them in there until they look nice and black, and then transfer them to some water to rinse them off. After that is done, I took them out of the water, dried them off, and attached them to the 3 hulls. I was actually working on the gig and the 2 whale boats. As you can see, when they were installed, they were too black. They were just too much. So I will change that later on. But in addition to the gudgeons, we need the pintlets. These are the pieces that go onto the rudder, which have this little wire piece that fits into the gudgeons. Strange name, gudgeons and pintles. But here you see how I did this with this torch, and it turns out pretty well. This is the one for the gig, the rudder for the gig, and then I did the same thing for the whaleboats. Here's the piece for the whaleboat and the one for the gig. This is the tiller, and we'll leave that blank, and the rest all will be painted white. I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but as long as I was doing this brazing, I decided to also make the thole pins. These are the pins that are on the boat for the oar locks. For that I used some brass rod, brass wire, and again did some soldering. The first step was to drill some small holes for the wires to go into that brass rod, which is a 1/16 of an inch wide. And the wire was actually 16 thousandths in diameter. For this, I used my Dremel-like tool in my drill press, then applied a little bit of the silver flux, inserted the pins, and then with the hot flame of the Bunsen burner of the torch, I barely touched that until these things just, here, let me repeat this, with a setup of 3 of them. Just barely touching, and the flux will make these little pieces come out just fine. Here they are. I needed a total of 24, maybe 26, and then blackened them, and that was the first step.